At 3:03 a.m., on a lonely stretch of track, deep in the English countryside, a single red signal light flickered on. The driver slowed the Royal Mail train, thinking it was a routine stop, something ordinary, something harmless. It wasn't. Ahead of him, beyond the glow of the headlamp, 15 men stood waiting in the darkness. No shouting, no warning, just masks, gloves, and a plan they had rehearsed for months. A plan to stop Britain's overnight mail train, break into the high-value package coach, and disappear into the night with more cash than the country had ever seen in a single robbery. When the sun came up, £2.6 million in used banknotes was gone. Britain woke to headlines that sounded impossible. A rail heist, a gang of 15, a fortune stolen, without a single gunshot. Most of the men would eventually be caught, but one of them would spend the next 36 years as one of the world's most famous fugitives. And to this day, a portion of the money has never been recovered. Tonight, we're going back to the tracks near Cheddington, to the quiet countryside, to the train that never should have stopped, to the gang who knew exactly what they were doing, and to the questions that still remain 60 years later, because the full story still isn't over. To understand that night, you have to start with the man who wanted it most. Bruce Reynolds, a professional thief, not a smash-and-grab amateur, but a man who treated crime like a career. Calm, patient, obsessed with the idea of one last perfect score. By the early 1960s, Britain was changing. Post-war rationing was gone, but money still moved the old way, through banks, through cash, and every night, through the Royal Mail. The Glasgow to London traveling post office, a long red and cream mail train running quietly through the dark. Dozens of postal workers sorting letters as the countryside slipped past. And in one special coach, the high-value package carriage, bags of used banknotes headed for London. For years, it was routine, predictable, trusted. The exact time the train left, the route it took, the way the money was loaded. Almost nobody outside the post office knew the true numbers, but someone talked. Sometime before August 1963, Reynolds and his circle were given a piece of information, a whisper about how much cash was moving on that line, which nights carried the biggest hauls, which coach it was stored in. The source became known only as the Ulsterman. To this day, his real identity has never been proven. With that one tip, Reynolds stopped thinking small. He began to build a team. Not a handful of petty thieves, but a crew big enough to stop a moving train, control dozens of postal workers, and move more than 2 tons of money into getaway vehicles in minutes. He brought in experienced robbers from London, men who had already hit banks and security vans, men who knew how to stay quiet and vanish when the job was done. But there was one problem. None of them had ever robbed a train before, so they reached out to another group. Specialists who understood the railways, men who knew signals, line-side telephones, and how to bring a locomotive to a halt without firing a single shot. Slowly, over months of quiet meetings, in pubs, safe houses, back rooms, a plan began to form. A plan built around one simple idea. If you can stop the Royal Mail train in the middle of nowhere for just half an hour, you can steal a fortune before anyone even knows it's gone. To stop the Royal Mail train, they needed more than men and muscle. They needed control. Control over the track. Control over the signals. Control over the exact moment the train would be forced to stop. And that meant finding one very specific weakness in the railway system itself. In the 1960s, the West Coast Main Line was a maze of signals, switches, and line-side telephones. Every stretch of track had its own logic, its own timing, its own vulnerabilities. Reynolds' team studied them all. Night after night, they drove the countryside in silence, pulling over near isolated junctions, watching how each signal changed, listening for the hum of the passing trains, mapping out every inch of the route. They needed a point the driver wouldn't question, a place where slowing down would feel routine. And they found it. A quiet stretch of track near Brigo Bridge, just outside Cheddington. A place with no houses, no witnesses, just farmland, and a single signal the driver trusted every night. The plan was simple on paper and incredibly dangerous in reality. They would tamper with the signal, force it to display red, make the driver stop the train exactly where they wanted, Then, under the cover of darkness, they would take control of the locomotive before anyone could react. But to pull it off, the gang had to rehearse the signal tampering over and over again without being caught. Hidden in fields, under hedgerows, and behind stone farm walls, the men practiced clipping wires, testing lanterns, and resetting the system so no one would notice anything until it was too late. Every movement had to be silent, precise, perfect, because once the signal went red, there was no turning back. They would either pull off the most daring railway robbery in British history, or be caught standing on the tracks with nothing to show for it but a broken plan. And as the nights ticked down, the gang prepared for the moment that would change all their lives. At 3:03 a.m., on a line that almost never lied, one light did. A single red signal on a stretch of track the driver trusted every night. No storm, no track damage, no warning from control, just red. The countryside held its breath. Fields, hedgerows, an empty bridge in the dark. On board the traveling post office, veteran driver Jack Mills watched the light hold. No flicker, no change. He eased the brake. Steel groaned. 30-odd carriages bunched hard against the locomotive. The mail clerks kept sorting, still thinking the stop was routine. Another minute, another junction, nothing more. But this stop wasn't on the timetable. In the hedgerow, two figures waited by the line-side relay box, faces covered, lantern hooded, hands steady. They had practiced this moment for months. Wires checked, contacts bridged, signal forced to red. The train rolled to a halt beneath the night. Engines idled. Metal ticked as heat bled from the brakes. Silence, and then movement in the dark. The gang split into teams, one toward the cab, one toward the trackside phone, another shadow watching the bridge. No guns, no shouting, just quiet instructions they all knew by heart. At the driver's door, gloved knuckles, a whisper. Then the door swung. Mills looked up into torchlight. Shapes, not faces. A voice. Easy now. The second man, David Whitby, moved instinctively. A hand pulled him back. Another man reached for the controls. It was over in seconds. Mills protested. Another short command. A hard blow. The kind that makes silence heavier than noise. He stayed on his feet, but the cab belonged to someone else. Outside, a coupler pin dropped. Metal clanked. The long train split in two. Engine and high-value coach at the front. The rest of the consist abandoned in the dark. No one in the sorting carriages knew it yet. A covered lantern flashed twice from the hedge, the signal the gang had rehearsed 100 times. The locomotive moved, slow at first, then steady. A few hundred yards down the line, Bridego Bridge waited. No houses, no witnesses, just stone, shadow, and a strip of rural road. The driver's world shrank to glass and steel. Hands he didn't recognize, orders he didn't give. The red light behind them swallowed by night. At the bridge, more men appeared from nowhere. Rope, canvas, a truck bed under a tarpaulin. The engine braked again, short, controlled, right where they wanted it. The countryside stayed quiet. Only the low tick of cooling metal, only the hum of the idling engine. In the carriages they'd left behind, mail kept moving from hand to hand. Time kept moving with it. Up front, the clock stopped belonging to the post office. It belonged to 15 men and a plan that finally had teeth. They had taken the train without a shot. They had moved it without a sound. They had the high-value coach exactly where they needed it. What came next was not routine. Not for the guards behind that door. Not for the men on the bridge. Not for anyone who woke to the headlines a few hours later. Because this wasn't about a red light anymore. This was about opening a coach that wasn't supposed to open. Fast, cold, precise. The kind of work you only get right once. And on that bridge, in that darkness, the clock started again for the loudest quiet robbery Britain had ever seen. The door was never meant to open, but on that night, it did. Beneath the bridge, a rail coach sat idle. Above it, a covered truck waited, engine off. Between them, a plan unfolded with precision. At 2:11 a.m., a crowbar found the seam. Pressure was applied. A twist followed. The metal flexed but held. Inside, two guards turned at the sound. faint but unmistakable. Seconds passed. The latch resisted, then gave. Boots stepped onto steel. A calm voice addressed the guards from the shadows. The lock failed. The door cracked open by an inch. Gloved hands reached forward, catching the edge, and then the real work began. No shouts, no weapons, only tools and timing. The guards offered no fight, no resistance, no warning raised. They were bound quickly, tape, rope, and a chair against the wall. The coach changed hands, not for long, just long enough to unload it. Canvas bags were pulled from racks, each one marked, weighed, and tagged. They were heavy, real weight, handled with practiced care. The crew moved in a line. One man cut the bags loose, another lifted, a third passed each one down the line. No drops, no voices, only efficiency. Bag to door, door to embankment, embankment to bridge, bridge to truck. The rope touched stone, canvas hit the wood floor, lanterns stayed hooded, headlights never flicked on. On the bridge, the driver kept one eye on the dash clock. Below, arms strained under weight, boots slipped on frost. Still, the transfer continued. Inside the coach, bags disappeared in methodical rows. On the bridge, the truck sagged slightly under the load. The road remained undisturbed, silent. A lookout watched both signal and lane. He raised a hand once, briefly. No words were spoken. The crew continued. Beneath one bench, the final bag. They pulled it free, checked the floor. No tags left behind, no tools, no prints. The last bag rose to the bridge. The rope was released. The tarpaulin dropped. Knots were tightened with precision. The door was closed. The seam untouched. Just cold steel and dust remained. In the dark, the guards breathed shallow. They heard steps. They heard the bridge above them. And then, nothing. Two muffled flashes broke the stillness. Not gunfire, just signals. It was time to leave. The truck rolled forward first, slowly over the crown of the bridge. Then it vanished. On the tracks, the crew disappeared into the hedge line. Tools packed, footsteps erased by dew. What happened here was quiet, deliberate, a breach executed with precision. A coach that was never meant to open, opened. Bags that were never meant to move, moved. And hands trained in silence made it happen. The break-in was complete. Now, the escape had begun. The robbery was done, but they weren't safe, not yet. On the bridge, the truck moved first. Silent, heavy, and fully loaded. Its tires rolled over damp tarmac, heading toward the B Road turnoff. Inside the cab, no one spoke. They had 35 minutes to reach the farmhouse. No mistakes, no noise. Behind them, the team on foot vanished into the hedgerows. Gloves came off, rope packed, tools split across canvas sacks. They took side tracks, avoided lights, avoided dogs, avoided roads, until the extraction cars pulled in. At 3:17 a.m., the two groups reconvened at Leatherslade Farm, a remote property pre-rented with clean staging space and no neighbors. There was no celebration, only instructions. They moved the bags into the outbuilding, stacked by weight, sorted by numbering. The plan was to lay low for days. No calls, no leaving, no flashing the money. The truck was stripped, burned. The drivers cut it down in a nearby field and left nothing but ash. One man rewired the farmhouse fuse box. Another buried tools in the woods. They changed clothes, wiped every surface. The operation wasn't fast, but it was precise. Every person had a role. Every moment was timed. By dawn, the crew was indoors. The train was gone, and the countryside had returned to silence. No sirens, no witnesses. Not yet, but the window was small. The stolen money couldn't sit forever, and in that quiet farmhouse, the real risk was only just beginning. It took 6 hours for the train crew to be discovered. One clerk managed to cut through the restraints with a broken hinge pin. At 4:37 a.m., he stumbled to a signal post and raised the alarm. By 6 a.m., police from 3 counties had arrived at the bridge. They found the guards tied up, the train split, the engine missing, and the high-value coach completely empty. News spread fast. By midday, radio bulletins were calling it the biggest robbery in British history. By evening, every newsroom in the country had the same headline: the Great Train Robbery. Scotland Yard took over the case. They called in the Flying Squad, the elite anti-robbery unit from London, known for rough methods and fast results. They were told, find them, fast. The investigation moved quickly. First, they found the truck, or what was left of it, burned out in a field outside Oakley. Then came the tip about the farmhouse. A local boy had seen men unloading something heavy a few nights earlier. He didn't think much of it until the news broke. Officers raided Leatherslade Farm 2 days after the robbery. By then, the crew was long gone, but the evidence wasn't. Inside the barn, they found rope fibers, boot prints, half-burned ledger sheets, and 1 fingerprint on a tomato sauce can. It was enough. One by one, suspects were picked up, some in London, some in hiding, some already planning to leave the country. Ronnie Biggs, Buster Edwards, Tommy Wisby, Jimmy Hussey, Roger Corddry, all arrested within 5 weeks. And then, Bruce Reynolds disappeared. The man who planned it all was gone. The press turned him into a legend, the last man standing, the ghost of the robbery. But Scotland Yard kept digging. They knew he'd need money. They watched his wife, intercepted calls, tapped lines. It took 5 years. They caught him in Mexico. By the end of it, 11 men were convicted. Sentences totaled over 300 years. But not all the money was recovered, and not everyone was caught. Roughly £2 million was never recovered. No one could say where it went, and no one came forward. In the years that followed, the story only grew. The robbery became legend, a folk crime, the kind people whispered about in pubs, the kind kids read about in comic books. And the train, the actual traveling post office coach, was quietly retired. One of the robbers escaped prison, Ronnie Biggs. He lived on the run for 36 years. Brazil, Australia, back to Brazil again. He gave interviews, released records, even joked with the press. But for Bruce Reynolds, the man who planned it all, the ending was different. He served his time, and when he was released, he disappeared again. He died in 2013, a free man, and still silent. No memoir, no confessions, no final answer to how it was done so cleanly, or where the rest of the money really went. Even today, over 60 years later, the Great Train Robbery remains unsolved because the men may have been caught, but the mystery never was.